She says determinism. And she argues there that, well, not all causation is deterministic. But the other point that I wanted to make was that it seems like, and this is what Dan and I were talking about at the break, it seems that you could just as easily push the kind of luck objection, this specific sort of rewind argument or the disappearing agent objection against compatibilists, but nobody ever does that. I mean, assuming we don't want to be committed to Hobart's view that moral responsibility, free will requires determinism, then we have to deal with that objection too. But then it occurred to me that, well, maybe the moral luck worries do the same kind of work. So the Nagel-type moral luck worries are doing the same kind of work. But dialectically, the way this makes me feel is that I, as a compatibilist, I can't really push this luck objection against the event causal libertarian because it affects me just as well. But what I would say is that what this helps us see is that adding the I would say that adding the indeterminism doesn't help us see why somebody's morally responsible. So the event causal incompatibilist story doesn't add anything that seems especially germane to me to moral responsibility.
Tell me why the disappearing agent argument can be also applied to compatibilists. I mean, okay, go ahead.
Oh, sure, because, so I mean, there may be two ways you could push it, and depending whether we're pushing the disappearing agent or the rollback. So maybe if we just focus on the disappearing agent for one way you could put it is, look, it's just events causing other events. The agent isn't doing anything.
If you assume that determinism is true, which the compatibilist wants to at least allow for.
Even if you assume determinism were true,
it's false.
I was going to say, even if you do, you might still think it's just events causing events. But then again, if you're a soft compatibilist or a super compatibilist, you think, you say you don't want to, to hold our views about ourselves as morally responsible hostage to the arcane findings of physicists and such. And that's the case, and you think free will and responsibility is compatible with indeterminism as well. But then you have the same exact worry, it seems, which is it seems that on the event causal view, if indeterminism is true, nothing about the agent settles whether or not the agent A's or B's in a certain situation. So it seems like. So, and I think Matt's right to say, well, look, maybe the thing to say to the incompatibilist or the libertarian is to say, well, you don't secure any further control through this. But it's not clear that the soft or super compatibilist can say you get even less control. It's like, well, then you're stuck with that too if it turns out that indeterminism is true.
Yeah, but, so if determinism is true, though, then the past together with the laws entail what I do now. So there will never be context where the past is all the same and the laws are the same and I do something else. So that particular worry that is part of the disappearing agent argument is not going to be applicable at all to the compatibilist. The compatibilist is going to be able to say, right, there's always going to be an antecedent difference in the worlds, or maybe a difference in the laws, but arguably an antecedent difference. There'll be some different set of event causes in those worlds where I do differently. Now, but if what you're saying is there is this general problem, it's not exactly the disappearing agent argument, but there's a general worry about reductionism.
That was the first thing I was saying.
Okay, that's the idea. That also applies, and that is true. I mean, David Velleman, in his article, What Happens When We Act, is that the name? That's a famous article by David Velleman that I reprinted in my 1993 anthology, Perspectives on Moral Responsibility, but it's probably, I'm sure it's in one of his collections, and What Happens When We Act, or What Happens When One Acts. He talks about this idea that, where is the agent if you have a Davidsonian picture, as it were, where you just have reasons causing actions, where now reasons are, as it were, recognitions of, or awareness of desires and beliefs. And but then that's where he makes this point that some of the events are special or speak for the agent in some deeper way. So, I mean, but what, I guess, is this what you were saying? There is a general problem of reductionism for the compatibilists. That would be the same. Like, where is the agent if everything that issues in my choice and my action is just events.
All the causes are events.
Okay, okay, so I grant you that.
But yeah,
It would just not be the same form as the disappearing agent act, because this is not just reductionism. The problem seems to be that you have bare trans-world differences. And you would never have bare trans-world differences under determinism. Any other world would have to have a different antecedent.
But you would have it under indeterminism.
Yes.
You want your view to be compatible with indeterminism.
Oh yeah, I want my view. I was just thinking you were saying that the same problem comes up for a compatible.
Well, I was saying, so in one sense, if the reductionist problem is a problem for both views, if it's a problem for any view.
Yes, it is.
And second of all, the problem about cross-world luck is also a problem for compatibilists insofar as they are soft or super compatibilists, insofar as they think that free will and moral responsibility are compatible with indeterminism.
Absolutely. I should just mark this. I have a way of replying to the rollback argument, and it's in, I think, a paper. Well, it's in a paper that's reprinted in Deep Control that originally was published. Well, it was originally published in Oxford Studies in Legal Philosophy, but it's called, I think, Indeterminism and Control, or then I've revised it to be called Towards a Solution to the Luck Problem, and it's forthcoming in Robert Kane, a Fischer for Robert Kane. But I have a way of seeking to answer the luck problem, and I know Al Neely has written a kind of response to it, but right, I think you can reply to the luck problem, but it's not something I want to really develop here. Yeah.
Two questions or comments. The first thing was, I think Helen Stewart makes this point that it's important in considering luck objections or luck arguments to distinguish between something being a matter of luck for me and something being a matter of luck for you, for instance. So I think a libertarian can certainly grant that it's a matter of luck for those that aren't performing the action, that I did this rather than that. But obviously the libertarian's going to want to deny that it's a matter of luck for me that I did this rather than that. So in one sense, one can concede that it is a matter of luck in one sense, but not in another. And the second question concerned whether agent causation can really solve or is immune from the rollback argument.
Right.
So I'm thinking of Szabo's assimilation argument, and I wanted to sort of further develop some of the moves he makes. So he considers these two cases where these are two rollback cases. In one, there's an event that's clearly random and not an exercise of free will, and in the other case, it's supposed to be an exercise of free will. So we can suppose the agent is an agent cause of their choice in the second case, but in the first case, right, let's just say it's an electron going this way rather than that way or something like that. And so the problem is, what's the relevant difference between these two rollback cases? And one thing Szabo doesn't say, but I think one could try to further develop his argument, is by saying something like this: look, suppose that we accept a substance-event causal relation as being universal. So whenever you have causation, it's always a substance causing some event. So suppose that we accept that sort of ontology. In that case, we can suppose the electron, qua substance, is a cause of, this event rather than being a cause of that event, which did not occur. And so there's sort of a structural similarity between an agent cause and a electron qua substance being a cause. And the worry is, well, look, there are clearly other differences between the electron and the agent. But the worry is, it doesn't seem like just adding, consciousness and intentionality to the electron, so to speak, is going to be enough to secure the kind of control that the libertarian was after all along. Because it seems like, in a certain sense, both the electron and the agent have the same sort of power to settle events. But clearly the kind of power that the electron has isn't the robust kind of settling that libertarians were after. And so the worry is, again, just adding in consciousness and intentionality doesn't really secure doesn't make the kind of settling that the electron had any more robust in a sense.
So this raises the question that we'll get to in this period of does agent causation help? That's the worry, right? And that you're pointing out that if you kind of do a thought experiment where you compare event causation of a certain sort with agent causation, and then you start adding in elements that you think comprise agent causation, it's not clear how that adding in those elements really helps with the problem of luck. And so, yes, we'll get to that. I wanted to just, before we go to agent causation, which is the next chapter, what I really wanted to make sure, first of all, is that no one had anything else they wanted to say about the disappearing agent or the rollback argument, or how you think these problems can be addressed, especially if you're an indeterminist. Libertarian. I know Dan has suggested some ways. Are there others who would like to comment on the disappearing agent or the rollback argument? Yep, Simon.
Only just to point out a parallel between the event causal on the compatibilist and the libertarian view. So it's not that the decision is uncaused for the event causal libertarian.
That's right.
Because the decision is probabilistically caused by the states of the agent. So I just think sometimes the objection is too quick in trying to establish that there's some kind of uncaused thing. So you might say, well, maybe the link between the states and the decision, the causal link, is somehow uncaused. Like, is the event of the state causing the decision itself an event? And if so, is that caused by something? But those kind of questions are going to be faced by the compatibilist as well.
Absolutely.
And so I just think it's important to be accurate about what the objection is, yes, and about the kind of uncausedness. It's better if you phrase it as you did, in terms of the no relevant difference thing, but right, it's not quite as simple as just something's uncaused and therefore.
Absolutely. So we're not, that's important. And Robert Kane has done important work, I think, in highlighting this in his contribution to the Four Views on Free Will book, and in his Significance of Free Will and other places. He's really emphasized that on an indeterministic event causal picture, of course, it's not as though my choices and my actions are uncaused. They are caused. They're caused indeterministically or probabilistically, where the probability is under 100%. But the events, the prior events that are doing the cause are, or can be, recognitions of reasons, desires, beliefs, or occurrent desires and beliefs. Or they could, as Chris Franklin emphasizes, include these special states that we think speak especially for the agent. And the causation can be, although indeterministic, doesn't have to be deviant in the way that, Donald Davidson and others point out, that sometimes your desires and beliefs can cause your behavior, but in what might be called a deviant way. But what is important is, even granting all of that, there is still this issue of the existence of bare transworld differences. By a bare transworld difference, I mean there are going to be differences across different possible worlds in whether the agent chooses or does as he actually does. And they're bare in the sense that they aren't antedated by differences in the antecedent causal states. They're the same. The antecedent causal states are the same in those worlds, and that might that's a residual worry, I think, at least. Now there are different ways of trying to respond to it. Yeah, okay,
Well,
Matt and
say, yeah, I mean, you're right. That it's not that it's uncaused. What you could say, I guess, is that, and maybe this is what you were suggesting, that the luck attaches to the fact that that causal relation held when it might not have, or that causal relation held rather than the other one.
Yeah.
And maybe you could say that at least that the agent didn't cause it to be, or nothing about the agent caused it to be, that it was that causal relation rather than the other one, or something along those lines, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, yeah, and I think that's something that people recognized, and Gary Watson makes it clear in his hard compatibilism and soft libertarianism paper, that you can't just say that. You can't just say that it's uncaused or that it's random. That the randomness objection doesn't
Really?
work. But there's a kind of associated objection that he thinks still does work. You just have to be more careful.
Right, and that going back to the debate between R.E. Hobart and Philippa Foot, because Philippa Foot said, no, these not causally, I mean, not all causation is deterministic. You can have indeterministic causation, and then it would be a mistake to say an indeterministically caused event is per se, or just simply in virtue of being indeterministically caused random. Randomness is something different. And so what I think people like Gary Watson and others are going to argue is that's all correct, and I'm sure Al Mealy would argue that's correct. It doesn't follow simply from the fact that something is indeterministically caused that it's random. But what we worry about, or what there is still a legitimate worry about coming from this problem of bare transworld differences. Okay, any other comment or question about the disappearing agent or the rollback? Okay, what I want, I want to just highlight a couple quick points. What Pereboom also argues is non-causal views, according to which, the prior desires and beliefs in some way explain one's behavior, or alternatively, one can be said to act for reasons or for purposes where those reasons or those purposes do not count as antecedent efficient causes. These views, again, the mystery is how you could be in control, and what he thinks is they benefit. Some of the proponents use terms like the agent makes it the case that certain behavior occurs or a choice is made, where what Pereboom argues is that kind of language suggests causation. It's causal language, but once you strip the views of these suggestions, it's not clear how there can be control. And that's the problem for these views. So there is this general, I just want to say, general association of control with causation of a certain, without it, it does seem hard to see how you can have it, but yes.
I mean, so just to, again, another small point, but so I take it, makes it the case that it seems like Pereboom was just saying that either is cause or it's unclear exactly what the control is. And then I guess was his other point that you could adopt a hybrid theory, but it ends up basically being agent causation, or in the sense that
doesn't give you could have a hybrid theory, but it doesn't add up to enough to give you control. Yeah, so you could even, I mean, there's a problem with the pure non-hybridized indeterministic causation. The problem comes from the disappearing agent worry. Then if you add in some non-causal component, that you're not really getting enough to get you to control, because the non-causal language, those theories don't really get you enough because they're implicitly assuming control. I mean, implicitly assuming determination. Artum, did you have something? Oh, no, okay, I thought maybe, okay, sorry. Sometimes I read people's body language, okay, Sophia.
Yeah, I don't know if this is suitable to take now or if I should take it later, but I wanted to say something about this agent causation and rationality thing.
Okay, let's do it later. Okay, let's get to it. Because the last thing, I just want to talk, oh yeah, okay, Artum. You see, there was a sense I had.
Maybe somebody asked about this, but I think Pereboom very easily throws away this thing that this causation may this libertarian causation may involve anything about the agent. I think he says something about this, but like when we look at this disappearing agent example, yeah, we see that, well, there is no like robust agent, but there is something about the agent. There is something about Ralph, about his beliefs, and so on. So can't we answer this objection using this way, like say that?
Well, there's the problem. Okay, I think the problem is just that if we assume indeterminism, and we assume an event causal model, and some of those events that cause Ralph's choice and his behavior are going to be recognitions of reasons, recognitions that some event has a certain characteristic that one wants or desires or has a pro-attitude to it. So those recognitions are prior events that cause one's choice and one's decision. The problem, though, is there will be other possible worlds in which the prior states, all of the prior states, including recognitions of reasons, are exactly the same, and one chooses differently. That just follows from indeterminism. Because, you know, if we had determinism, then all the prior states together with the laws would entail the choice. But now we say, no, indeterminism is true. So all the prior states together with laws are consistent with one's making a different choice. So now you could ask, how is it that if there's this range of worlds in which everything about the agent in the past is the same, but he makes different choices, how is it up to the agent what happens? You know, okay. Does that help at all?
Well,
okay.
Yes,
But okay, that's at least the worry. Now, I'm not saying it can't be resolved. I mean, I think Franklin wants to say, well, if the actual event, you know, choice comes from one of these, a state that really speaks for the agent, then that's, you know, that the agent doesn't disappear. I mean, she's there, but of course, the assumption is that element that speaks for the agent will be present in the other worlds in which the agent does otherwise, so there'll still be that worry. I don't know exactly how to resolve it decisively. I mean, I have my own way in my paper toward a solution to like more indeterminism and control, it's in my book, Deep Control. I have a way of addressing this. I don't know if it's going to be compelling to everyone. Let's look at a related problem, though, before we talk about agent. It's this last section, which I thought brought it out again in a kind of compelling or a graphic way. So it's page 47, randomizing manipulation. So here it is. Let me just read it. Again, he brings it out really. I think these are nice thought experiments here that at least. So, I mean, I must say, sometimes I am very much in agreement with Thomas Nagel when he says, in philosophy, the questions are often more interesting or more compelling than the answers. And here, the challenge seems, the luck problem has always seemed a little more compelling than any of the answers, to me at least. But then people disagree. I mean, I think others would just say, well, kind of like the way Dan was originally reacting, that if a defendant in an actual court of law made an argument like this, we'd probably laugh him out of court. And life is tough, there's luck, you chose this, you chose it for your own reasons. But upon reflection, it can seem to get some grip on one. So here it is. Imagine Ralph Starr, whose capacities, character, motives, and efforts are qualitatively identical to those of Balaguer's Ralph. Ralph Starr also makes the choice to move to New York. But intimately involved in this choice is not the usual determining manipulator featured in arguments against compatibilism, but a randomizing manipulator who spins a dial which will land on one of two positions. Imagine that the spinning of the dial is a metaphysically indeterministic event, and that it is not merely indeterministic relative to the spinner's knowledge. So it's not just we don't know or the agent doesn't know, it's genuinely metaphysically indeterministic. Suppose in addition that the dial's landing on a position just is the crucial indeterministic component of the neural realization of the choice to perform the action, and that it is not simply an indeterministic event that deterministically causes one choice rather than the other. Add to this that the dial's landing on a position does not supplement the normal neural processes, but rather replaces the crucial indeterministic component in these processes. The position the dial lands on, therefore, makes the salient difference as to which decision he makes. If the dial settles on one position, Ralph Starr makes one choice, and if it lands on the other, he makes the other. Suppose, in addition, that Ralph Starr, just like Ralph, has reasons for making the choice. He chooses for these reasons. He wants to choose for these reasons more than any other. He's not... Okay, this is another one of many typos. Have you noticed how many typos? Yeah, I sent him a list, and so if you might want to take notes, but there are many, many typos, many of which I didn't even notice. He said, I'm not a very good proofreader. So, but actually, if you notice typos, you might just send it to him, because he'll have the paperback, he'll be able to change it. He is not being coerced or compelled in choosing. It's nevertheless implausible that indeterminacy of the sort exhibited by Ralph Starr's decision provides for moral responsibility in the basic desert sense. And this is intuitively because he lacks control over her decision?
Yeah, that's
Again, I mean, there's just so many typos here. It's too bad. I mean, you always understand what he's trying to say, which is good. But he just, unless Ralph just had a sex change operation, this is a typo. It is incumbent on a defender of event causal or non-causal libertarianism to provide a principled difference between Ralph Starr and Ralph, that it would explain why an agent could be responsible in this way for a decision that fits their theories, but not for the one produced by the manipulator. This, I believe, cannot be done. So what he's saying is, if you imagine this kind of device inside an agent that, you know, is genuinely random, it's like it's a random number generator that's metaphysically indeterministic, and it replaces the ordinary neurophysiology of the agent, and it's a crucial link. I mean, if it ends up in one square, the agent will do X. If he'll go to New York. If it changes, you know, in the other one, he'll do something else. That happens just before Ralph's choice. What Parable wants to say clearly, in that kind of thought experiment, the agent's not responsible. And he says there's no principled way of distinguishing this from the ordinary situation under event causal indeterminism. So what do you think about this?
I think that Parable does here the same maneuver as he does in his 4 steps argument. He starts with the manipulation case, and then goes to like control case.
Yeah, and he says there's no difference.
Yeah, and he said that there is no difference, but many people would argue with this.
Right.
And what we see, there is a neuroscience who randomly takes decisions for Ralph, and in this case we will say that Ralph is manipulated. But if this randomizer is installed in Ralph's brain, we will not say that Ralph is manipulated. So this is how his brain works, and this is how Ralph's own, let's say, mind, his reason responsiveness, and all these processes are naturally realized. And I think that there is that his this step from manipulation to control is not legitimate.
So I think it's a good point that this has abstractly the same structure as manipulation arguments generally and the four-case argument. He even says, you know, he points out that this, I mean, he at least refers to the, you know, he says this is not the usual determining manipulator features in arguments against compatibilism. So he realizes that it's similar in some ways, but a little different. But you're right. I just want to say you're right. He starts with the thought experiment involving the wheel that spins, and then he says, in that case, the agent wouldn't be responsible. And now he's making a no difference claim, just like in the manipulation argument. He says there really would be no principled way of making a distinction between this scenario and ordinary event causal indeterminism. So you're right, structurally it's parallel to his arguments against determinism, against compatibilism. And you're right also that you could challenge it at various levels, like the no, you could challenge it at the first stage where he says no responsibility. More plausibly, you could challenge it at the no difference stage. Okay, Angelina?
Yeah, well, about what Artyom said. Just I don't see such a big gap between manipulation cases and controlling cases. If this manipulator is in his brain, you said that now we will think that it's actually his own decisions, but no, I will say no, I will not. I will say that it's not like that.
But it's how the brain works.
Let me consider three cases. Let us imagine that there is a randomizer in our brain. In every brain there is a randomizer which helps us to be free in the libertarian sense. In the first case it works normally, like all of us have this randomizers, and these randomizers work normally. In the second case, imagine like nearest future, this randomizer may be changed for a chip, which is functionally equivalent to this natural brain randomizer. And the third case is, imagine that this chip is remote and is controlled by a guy who presses the button and the dial spins, and it works as a randomizer as well. And what my intuition is that in the first two cases, when we have natural randomizer and when we have a chip which is put instead of randomizer, the mechanism works normally. The mechanism of our decision taking and our minds work as they work in nature. And in the third case, when this randomizer is controlled by another guy, although it still works like randomizer, we are manipulated. And I think that it's rather a strong intuition.
There's the same kind of sequence that you could...
So the difference is only between in the last case it's a person who manipulates.
Yeah, that's what Peribum starts with.
And in other cases it's just a chip, like a random thing, but I don't know. A person who can manipulate, he also can be absolutely random. And
the person is...
so what's the difference between a person and a chip?
That there is a person who manipulates you.
Well, where is the chip who manipulates me? What's the difference between person and chip? I don't see
a person is him or herself morally responsible. So you are not any more morally responsible for your decisions.
Well,
like your decision making process was initiated by
just the other person being morally responsible wouldn't necessarily take away your moral responsibility. I mean, two people could be morally responsible for bringing about the same thing. So I do think that why does it matter? I mean, so that is a difference between a person and a chip, but you might not think that's a relevant difference.
That is like a view that Daniel Dennett claimed that Almile held. Daniel Dennett writes somewhere that according to Almile, there is a sort of default of moral responsibility. Unless someone else is responsible for your actions, you are. And then Miele said that, I never said that, that is not my view at all, but it sounds like you really have that view. Unless someone else is responsible for what I did, then I am.
Well, or is it if somebody else, then I'm not? So is that, maybe that's the same? Maybe
Yeah.
That's a little bit similar.
But let me just let's go on this manipulation kind of thought expression, randomized manipulation. Now it's a indeterministic manipulation case. And by the way, I've often thought that the manipulation arguments that are typically wielded against compatibilists could be wielded against libertarians as well. They're going to be slightly different. I mean, I think Miele makes this argument, and others of us, Stephen Kearns, in an article, important article, I think, has made this point. And then, of course, some libertarians have pushed back and said, no, they're distinctively appropriate for compatibilism. But it seems like you could have indeterministic manipulation as well. I mean, what if someone secretly manipulates you so that it's 95% probable that you'll do something, and you do it? That seems to be, if not exactly as problematic as a deterministic manipulation, it's similarly problematic. But we can return to that next time when we talk about the four-case argument. But here, what's interesting is, I mean, what he does say is, this features a randomizing manipulator, so a person who spins a dial, which will land on one of two positions. Okay, and notice, by the way, this is important. Suppose, in addition, that the dial's landing on a position just is the crucial and deterministic component of the neural realization of the choice. So it's not antecedent to the choice. I mean, you might have thought, well, there's this spinning wheel, and if it comes out one way, that will determine a choice. And then if it comes out another way, it'll determine a different choice. That's not, he's imagining someone, a person, spins a dial, and then how it lands will be part of the neural realization of a choice. It'll be literally part of a choice, not antecedent to a choice. And so what he says is, this is in principle no different, and not relevantly different from the way it would work if you were an event causal, presumably materialist, event causal theorist. And because it's clear to him that the agent's not responsible, he thinks in this scenario, and there's no principal difference, couldn't be responsible in an ordinary scenario under event causal indeterminism. And I think it's important that I don't think there being a person spinning the wheel matters at all. I mean, I don't think he thinks it matters. I mean, if there just was a randomizing device that kicked in, it wouldn't have to be a person with certain intentions, right? But I mean, what do you think? What do you libertarians think about this? I mean, where is it problematic? Yes?
So it seemed one straightforward way I took that you could just reply would just to dispute his description of the case. When he says Ralph Starr has reasons for making the choice and he chooses for those reasons, it doesn't seem like to me he chooses for any reasons, because he doesn't seem to choose. If there's some kind of indeterministic thing doing the work in his brain, or however that, the neural, the randomizing thing, I don't know, it just seemed to be false to me. I don't know why. I mean, you can't just stipulate something and then say, now make sense of this puzzle. But it has to be possible on the metaphysics of the event causal libertarian.
So he does say that Ralph chooses, and he says Ralph Starr chooses, and just like Ralph has reasons for making the choice, he chooses for these reasons, he wants to choose for them. The difference is that part of the ordinary neural realization of his choice is replaced by this randomizing, or this random event that's the result of the spinning of the wheel, or that is the landing on one space rather than another is now replacing part of the neural sequence. So you want to say, because of that, maybe it's not now appropriate to say that he chooses or chooses for reasons. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, I'd be happy to, maybe you could come up with a, maybe it'd be okay to say the end result is that he has a state of having a certain intention. Right? But that doesn't suffice for having chosen, for the agents having chosen.
Let's say more about, okay, so let's say you were a dualist, or you deny physicalism or materialism about the mind, then I could see straightforwardly how you would resist this claim that under this circumstance Ralph Starr chooses. But is that your view, or, I mean,
That's not
no, okay, so you're a materialist, or you want your view to be consistent, let's say, with materialism about the mind. So what is it about this situation that makes you say that under that specific scenario, Ralph Starr doesn't even make a choice? I mean, in the actual kind of situation, or the ordinary situation, there's some material or physical process, and part of it now has been replaced with a different physical constituent. But so it can't just be the physical qua physical. There's something else. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, and I guess it's the. So you could run Pereboom's kind of four-case thing against himself on this, right? So let's just suppose we replace the agent's entire brain or something like that. But the end result is that, and then you swap it back in at the end, and the end result is that he has this intention. So he seems to have chosen one way or the other, in some sense or other. He's now resolved to do something. Presumably most people would think if you had swapped out the entire brain during the deliberation and the decision process, we would not say he's genuinely chosen. Right? So now just, well, let's swap out half the brain, right? Or swap out 3/4, or so now we're just swapping out this crucial indeterministic bit. But that's the bit that on the libertarian's picture is the important bit. So if you swap out that bit, there seems to be at least something that the libertarian at least has some kind of reason for saying, well, hang on, is this a coherent description of the case, and
Okay,
isn't
good.
this something we could...
Good. So I hope everyone, so what Simon is saying is it's not really indisputably and uncontroversially a coherent description of the case. A libertarian might question whether Ralph Starr is really choosing or choosing for reasons in this kind of case. Now, if you ask why not, well, what he might say is, well, I don't know exactly why not, but we can at least motivate the worry that Ralph Starr is not genuinely choosing by a four-case kind of argument or similar. So you start by saying, if you take Ralph's brain out completely, and then what would you replace it with? Just something else. I mean, that would involve, part of it would be the manipulation, the spinning wheel, landing on that particular, but
and all the extra stuff that's needed.
And anything. If you swap it all out, you'd say, oh no, he's not making a choice. And then you work back to this case, and you still might. So it's like a
Yeah, so I mean, if I make the objection, you can say to me, well, why doesn't it count as a choice, right? But so you might think I need to have an account of what it is to make a choice that would allow me to say that. But I could just say to Pereboom, well, you need to have an account of what it is to make a choice to make this description of the case coherent. And that's when you could...
An interesting argument to write up, actually. I haven't... This is the first time I've seen this particular argument that he adds, this randomizing manipulation. And then I haven't seen a response, so that would be an interesting... To apply his own four-case argument against him might be interesting. Okay, other comments about this? Yep, before...
Yes, so in the case where you have Ralph Starr, it does seem like after the decision has been made by the randomizing choice, maybe Ralph Starr is sort of doing some post hoc rationalization, but I guess it's not, sort of in line with what Simon was saying. That would be like he might think that he might take himself to have reasons, and that might explain why he would feel justified or lack of justification, depending on how strong those reasons are for what he did, but it doesn't seem to explain the actual decision itself. Just a small point.
No, that's a good. That's valid. But yeah. So anyway, it's something to think about. This was another way of getting at, I think, the same problem, same kind of worry or similar worry to the worry that's brought out by the disappearing agent and the rollback argument. The famous problem of luck. Yep. Anybody else on this? Yes?
Well, one small question.
Okay.
Maybe that's because I'm new in philosophy. I don't quite get why this approach is actually legal. Why can we take some case and make a smallest step from it to a different case, and finally we come to a very different case and say, oh, it's the same. As I remember, the scene with much sand works the same way, and finally we don't have a whole object.
The heat
Yeah.
argument,
varieties.
Yeah.
Why does it work?
Good. Well, I think that's a good question. So often in philosophy, we do reason in the way in which Parabum is reasoning in the four-case argument or this randomized manipulation case. And I know that I have done this many times where I'll start with a certain hypothetical case and say, we'd want to say such and such about the case. Now consider a related case that's a little different. We'd want to say the same thing about that case, and then consider another case that's even a little different from the second case. We'd want to say the same, and therefore, we conclude that whatever we said about the first case, we want to say about the last case. Now, one thing one can notice about these forms of argument is you might be able to run the argument the other way, that nothing about the no difference intuition entails that you should start at one place rather than another. And again, McKenna has made this point in print about the four-case argument. He says, Parabum starts from the manipulation example and works back to the ordinary case. You could equally start at the ordinary case and work backwards to the manipulation case. And, just from the no difference intuition, you don't get one way or another. But then there's also the worry about sorites. And so there has to be some difference between valid uses of this argumentative strategy and specious or invalid uses. And I don't know how to say what the difference is in a general way. I mean, I've often thought, well, it can't be the case that all arguments like this are similarly problematic. I mean, problematic in the same way that sorites argumentation is problematic. But what the difference is exactly, I'm not sure. I mean, one difference just seems to be in the sorites case, you're applying the no difference intuition given tiny changes many, many times. So, the argument is, here's a heap, the Greek word soros for heap, and that's why it's called the sorites paradox. Now, if you just take one grain of sand away, it's still a heap, yes. And if you take one more grain of sand, it's still a heap, and then blah, blah, blah. But then eventually you're going to get down to a couple of grains, and you're going to get one grain, and it's not a heap, but there's no difference in general between something that is a heap and something that has one fewer grain of sand. So, I mean, I don't know, or, and people apply this, of course, quite generally. I mean, someone, let's see, well, you have I wouldn't call you bald. Your hair is short, but it's not bald. But, I wish there's someone.
I've gone gray, I'm not.
Okay, you're not bald. So Matt is not bald. I don't know if you'd say I'm bald. I hope no one would say I'm bald, but maybe some people would. Like, if you ask Tina, she might say, wow. But in any case, Matt is not bald, but if we took one, if a barber just clipped one hair from him, he'd still not be bald. Maybe if the barber clipped one more hair, he'd still not be bald. But then at some point he would be, but the general principle that if someone's not bald, just taking one hair away from him shouldn't make a difference, that seems right. And so there's something problematic about this reasoning. We all agree that there's something problematic, and then, it's a matter of saying what it is. intuitively, I think that form of reasoning is different from the four-case argument, but how exactly it's different is okay. So Dan, do you have a way of saying? And so it's an excellent question, I have to say. Yeah.
Maybe this is just an idea. So in the Socrates, in those sorts of Socrates paradox, where it has to do with quantity, every change you're making. So I mean, the difference, presumably, if there's a difference at all between a heap and not a heap, it has something to do with the quantity.
Yeah.
Every change you're making is a change in the quantity. So it seems like, no, that isn't an uncontroversial premise to say, oh, but changing this amount of quantity, it's like, well, you are changing something relevant to the conclusion at the end that we don't want to accept. Whereas in these cases, you're supposed to be changing things that are completely irrelevant to someone's control or moral responsibility. But I mean, you having one hair removed or not, you might think it's not very relevant to whether or not you'd be bald or not, but it's definitely relevant because whether you're bald or not has to do with the quantity of hair you have.
Right. Okay. So is this the point that in the Socrates kind of puzzles, you are changing something that is relevant intuitively, even if it's just relevant a little. So changing the number of hairs, even by one, is relevant, though we think not in itself enough. And taking one piece of sand away is relevant to whether you have a heap, even though it's relevant only in a tiny way. But the idea, maybe in the valid uses of this argument, is the changes aren't supposed to be relevant at all, not even just a tiny bit.
But aren't they supposed to be? I mean, isn't that the whole point of the argument that they are relevant to moral responsibility?
No, not
Enough to make the no difference claim. It's supposed to be the no difference. I mean,
well, yeah, but you're
according
not
to
responsible in all these cases.
So
right?
like in the four-case argument,
right.
Yeah, I mean, I think if everyone wants to say, well, I'm just changing features just to sort of tweak your intuitions or make you see something differently. But in the end, he wants to say there's no relevant difference.
Yeah, he wants to say there's no relevant difference at all. So what Dan is suggesting, this is interesting, is that, and I've actually written a paper on this having to do with the trolley problem, because the trolley problem, this ethical puzzle, you often have reasoning like this. You'll say, in this case, it's obviously not okay to save 5 people and let one person die. You know, it's not okay to, shunt the train to the right and run over 5 innocent persons to save that one. Then you have other cases where you want to say, and it's similar, this case is similar to that, and this case similar, and then you conclude something about this last case. I mean, I can't give you a really nice example right now, but I had a paper, it appeared in the Yale Journal of Law and Humanities, of all places, where I tried to say that form of reasoning is not relevantly similar to the Socrates kind of puzzle. But I didn't see, I had some other reason, or maybe I said something similar. It's been so long, I can't. But Dan's idea is really interesting, because what he's saying is, in the valid uses of, let's say, transitivity or multiple cases where you say there's no difference, what makes it valid is the cases purportedly at least differ in no relevant respect, not just a tiny respect. But in the problematic cases, they differ in a tiny respect.
Exactly. Yeah.
And therefore, if you have multiple iterations, the tininess will add up to something significant. Whereas in the other case, if there's no difference, the multiple real iterations won't make a difference. Okay, Ishai?
Can I?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I agree with that distinction, but then there arises another problem. All right, we change our examples just a little, keeping something essential the same, but it seems possible that outside this essential part appears something that is relevant, and we just don't notice it.
Mm-hmm. So, so in which cases you're thinking in the, is this what you're saying, that the proponent of the, let's say, four-step argument, four-case argument, is going to say, like Paramo is going to say, there's not any difference between the two adjacent cases, not even a tiny difference. But he or she may well be missing something that is. Yes. That is definitely true. I mean, that's what I want to say about the four-case argument, but there has to be some difference between the four-case argument and the Socrates structurally. Yeah. Did you, Yeshaya?
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe a heap, you know, we might think is a vague term, and if you accept like a linguistic account of vagueness, there's just some sort of semantic indeterminacy with respect to whether or not a heap latches onto the property of 3 grains of sand or something like that. Yeah. But it's at least not obvious to me that moral responsibility in the basic desert sense is going to be a vague term. So that could be one relevant difference, because we could have cases in which a term is not vague, but it has a quantitative element to it. So like Matt has 10,000 hairs, and then we can say, you know, a quantitative difference can make all the difference between Matt having that property and not having that property. I just think maybe it's a vagueness issue.
So there, yeah, that is a good point, that some people have argued that what's going on in the Sorites puzzle is that there perhaps is definiteness in nature, or in the universe, in the external world, such that there is a point at which actually, you know, we would say Matt goes from having hair to being bald. There is a point. It's just that semantically there's a vagueness in our conceptualization or our understanding that we don't really necessarily, we haven't captured that exact point in our semantics. But then there's another view is that the world itself is vague. I mean, that it's not just in our semantics, that there's no fact of the matter in nature.
That view's crazy.
Okay, there you go.
There's a fact of the matter about baldness?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a fact of the matter about how many hairs I have, but I think baldness isn't
Some people would say in nature there is a fact of the matter, and there's a fact of the matter about heaps, that at some point, maybe, and this will seem silly, but if there is 1,452 grains of sand, you have a heap. But if you have 1,451, then you don't have a heap, and that's a fact about nature. It's just that our conceptualization is not fine-grained enough, or our, yeah.
Epistemic vagueness, some people call it.
Epistemic vagueness versus metaphysical, but other people think there's actual metaphysical vagueness, that there's no fact, you know, in the world of it. And it's very hard to resolve this. I mean, I think actually some people think this is the most important problem of contemporary philosophy. I think, not Frank Jackson, but Timothy Williamson, I think doesn't he think this
he
is...
He argues for the epistemic vagueness view, I think. And I don't think the people who take the epistemic vagueness line say like, no, there really is a fact of the matter, just that we're just not sure where it is. Yeah. I don't think they think that it's not, that it doesn't sound kind of silly to say like, yeah, it's right when you hit the, you know, under 984 mark, then you're bald. I think that they would admit, yeah, that does sound sort of silly. But I think that they think that the other views have worse consequences. So I mean, you know, you think you have what are these issues of problems with the law of excluded middle or something like that. I might be getting is that the one then, or bivalence? It's one of those. You might think that there's some sort of untoward implications about that, and we have more reason to save those than we do to save. It's just saying like, oh, if I just have to say, yeah, okay, it sounds sort of silly. Okay, it's not a big deal. But if I have to deny excluded middle or bivalence, that might be a bigger deal.
On what we want to save and what we're willing to give up, but that's an excellent question. There's got to be some difference if we think this kind of argumentation is legitimate, at least, even if we don't agree with Paraboom's conclusion, we'd have to say there's some difference between this kind of argumentation and obviously problematic Sorites kind of argumentation. Okay, good. But it is really hard to say exactly what's wrong with the Sorites argument. But I like Dan's suggestion as to one difference. Maybe that is what I was trying to get at, I forget. But it's not a tiny difference. Paraboom's not saying there's a tiny difference. He's just saying there's a factual difference that makes no moral difference at each stage. Now, of course, that's controversial. Okay, any other comments about event causal libertarianism? Let's go to agent causal libertarianism. Often, agent causation is appealed to as because people find both a deterministic picture and an event causal indeterministic picture problematic. They don't think the event causal libertarianism or non-causal libertarianism gives you enough freedom. The agent causal approach might be best seen as an answer to problems with the event causal approach. Well, you know, let me just say, different agent, this is the basic idea that everybody, just to make sure we're on the same page, that causation, let's see, oh. Causation is a relation between two relata. It's the causal relation, C, between two relata, and sometimes at least the first relatum is an agent, is a substance, or an agent. Not an agent's having a property or an agent's undergoing a change, but just an agent qua substance. And that causes an event. Okay, now agent cause, now we all agree that we sometimes say things like Artum threw the rock through the window, and Artum caused the window to break. But that's shorthand often for something that can be understood in terms of a relationship between events. So when we say Artum caused the window to break, it's Artum's throwing the rock in a certain direction. So you could say often talk about agents causing things is reducible to, is shorthand to, and thus metaphysically or semantically or metaphysically reducible to claims or facts about events. But the agent causal theorist denies that and says that, well, doesn't deny that sometimes you can do that, but what the agent causal theorist wants to say is that there are genuine instances at the fundamental metaphysical level of agents as individuals, not as being parts of events causing events. And now the agent causal theories differ in lots of ways. There are families, there's a family of agent causal views. And one way in which they differ is which event they think is directly agent caused. So I think one of the more influential contemporary agent causal views is by Tim O'Connor, and he thinks the agent is not directly causing bodily movements or an action, but rather the forming of an intention, the making of a choice, or the coming to be of an intention to act in a certain way. That's what's directly agent caused. And what the agent causal theorist wants to say is, even if it were true that event causal indeterminism doesn't deliver control, by adding in some way, agent causation as irreducibly present whenever you have agency and responsibility, you get the kind of control you need. It's a control conferring power, intrinsically control conferring power. I mean, it's somehow defined as a power in virtue of the exercise of which, in certain contexts, the agent exercises control. Okay? And good, yes?
But does this entail some kind of dualism?
No, I think it's supposed to not entail dualism. Now, some philosophers who've accepted agent causation also accept dualism. I think Kant had an agent causal picture, and I think Kant is clearly some kind of dualist, though there are different ways of interpreting it. But it doesn't entail dualism. You could be I mean, it also, let me just say, does not entail indeterminism. Just accepting agent causation is consistent with determinism, because you have Ned Markosian and Dan Anelkin and others, as Dirk Pereboom has pointed out, who accept agent causal views, but also they think it's consistent with determination. But what I want to say is, philosophers like O'Connor argue that there is irreducible agent causation, and further that that somehow requires indeterminism, and indeterminism as part of the picture is necessary for acting freely on their view. So, okay, let me just, Artun.
My comment is related to what Dmitry said. your question was absolutely reasonable because Pereboom uses this extremely inappropriate term substance. All this substance terminology involves let us remember all these substance discussions, dualism, and personal identity things. I don't know, substance interaction.
Substance is neutral between physical and non-physical, right? So
Yeah.
it could be a physical substance.
As far as I understand, maybe I'm wrong, but for Chisholm, for example, he distinguishes two types of causation, and not he doesn't introduce like there is a substance of agent. We don't need this term first of all. We may need agent, but not substance.
Maybe the term was confusing. I mean, you think of substance dualism. You might think of Descartes arguably as thinking that there are these non-physical substances, and so. But I think Pereboom is thinking of substance as just an individual, and so think of it. Replace it with individual. An individual qua individual can be a cause on this model. And interestingly, I would just say irreducibly a cause, and not just as a shorthand. And I think it's supposed to be consistent with physicalism and consistent with determinism. But when you have determinism, according to certain proponents of agent cause, not all, because Dana Melkin is a proponent of agent causation. I think she thinks you need it to avoid something like the disappearing agent problem or the problem. I mean, she thinks, I think she's a non-reductionist about agency, but she's also a determinist and a compatibilist. And it's kind of tricky.
But physical closure, how's that? Yeah, as a follow-up, I mean, how does that
fit with agent causation?
Yeah, how is that in line with? The two kinds of what is causally efficacious is existence. If you have two kinds of causation, that's the same thing as saying you've got two kinds of substances, or maybe I'm missing something, and it contradicts the causal closure of physical.
Okay, let's get to we'll think about that. And ultimately, part of Pereboom's reason, or his main reason for rejecting the plausibility. He thinks arguably agent causation is coherent. I mean, but it's not clear that it's coherent, but arguably it is. Randy Clark, in his book, what's Randy's book? Libertarian Accounts of Free Will. He backed away from his earlier acceptance of of agent causation. Randolph Clark used to be a proponent of agent causation, but in his book, as I recall, he thinks there are enough considerations against the coherence of agent causation to render it, all things considered, probable that it's incoherent. Is that right? I mean,
that's right. I think he does think that.
Okay.
I think the integrated agent event causal. He has this hybrid view.
Yes.
That he thinks is coherent, but again, he thinks we don't have evidence that we have any.
Oh, he thinks that is coherent?
In the book, yeah, I think.
Oh, okay. I thought he'd rethought his position, so now he thinks it's not coherent.
But
okay.
I remember, and this is also a follow-up, I remember we had a colloquium once at Stockholm University. Unfortunately, I can't remember her name now, but there was a philosopher, this was several years ago, who argued that we can understand all causation in terms of substance causation. Right. And obviously she talked about material substances there, not that there is some kind of immaterial soul in everything, but...
Dana Nelkin holds that view, I think.
Sorry?
Dana Nelkin holds that view.
Yeah, but it wasn't Dana Nelkin, because I know her. So, but, so basically, all causation should be thought of as substances causing things, because substances have various powers, and that would make agent causation like harmonize with all kinds of different causation. But that also means that insofar as such a view is coherent, it also means that you don't need at all to bring in some kind of immaterial soul that causes that.
But I mean, I do know E.J. Lowe is a proponent of that view. E.J. Lowe thinks all causes are substance, not substances being involved in events, but substances. And so again, so it's interesting. I didn't think Dan and Elka thought.
And he thinks that this is agent causal, and he's, that your last professor, I don't know, he's agent causal libertarian. The last
yeah. Oh yes, E.J. Lowe.
Oh, that's okay. That's where I just wanted to point that actually, me too. Kind of, when I read the description of agent causal libertarianism, thought about it. He clearly should mean something like dualism here, but maybe this is because, for example, there is a. What he in his text, in first chapter, the causation involved in an agent making a free decision is not reducible to causation among events.
Yes.
So clearly he means some two causations, and
it's not the logical dualism.
Yeah. So you're right. He does think there's two kinds of causation. One is just relating events, and the other is relating agents and events. You could distinguish. I just want to say. So here, some people think, right, in the world there's just some instances of causation where you have two events standing in the causal relation, and then there are other instances where at the very fundamental level it's just irreducibly an agent causing an event. And now let me just say, some would say these are two kinds of causation. Others would say it's the same kind of causation, just takes different relata in some cases. I think Tim O'Connor thinks these are two different kinds of causation, and Randy Clark thinks one kind of causation, but just different relata. But now, again, others want to say, no, there is no such thing as agent causation. That's just a shorthand, but all causation ultimately is event causation. Others, like E.J. Lowe, think at the fundamental level, all causation is agent causation. Substance causation. But that then there are certain substances that are agents. You know, this table is a substance. This, the rocks are substances. But now agents are special substances with consciousness and with executive capacities and so forth. But now, okay, does this? Yeah,
but anyway, he means two different...
either two different kinds or two different sets of relata, but it doesn't yet follow that the thing in question is immaterial. So,
probably.
Okay, yep.
Just along those lines, Ned, I think it's Ned Hall's paper, two concepts of causation. One is substance, one is omissive causation. So I mean, you could even acknowledge omissive causation where there might not even be a strict causal relation, or at least it's not events on both sides.
What is it called? Emissive?
Omissive causation involving omissions, and then depending on how you define omission, a number of other things. But those used alone certainly don't entail any sort of dualism or immaterial. Something like that. So just to say that even if you said that these are two concepts, that alone wouldn't get you dualism.
No, that would not get you dualism. And he is not. Now, it is true that some agent causation proponents were dualists, but it's not in virtue of being an agent causal theorist. It's not even in virtue of being an agent causal theorist that you have to be an indeterminist. That's an add-on. Okay, did you have something?
Yes, just a small comment. We could make an even stronger claim if we wanted to. We could say everything comes from agents, not just from subject, from substances. Just everything.
Yes, that would even be a stronger claim. That's I don't know who holds that, but in other words, you hold it, but no.
I mean, not me. I met such a point of view. Very interesting book. I am thinking maybe of a presentation on it.
Okay, that's interesting. So that on that view, it's not just that all causation is substance causation, but all causation is agent causation.
Berkeley holds that view, right?
Does he? Because is it all
causation is agent causation, right?
And I would say that material causation was regarded very weird for all 17th century and for the first half of 18th century.
I see, okay.
All Cartesianists thought that there must be at least the first cause agent, or an agent who actually causes something.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right, so we're at the point where we need to stop for lunch. But so what we'll do afterwards, we'll start with the question, does agent causation help? Does it help to solve the disappearing agent problem? Does it help to solve the rollback? Does it help to solve the luck problem, or does it have its own problem? And then we'll also look carefully at Paraboom's objection to agent causation. It's really coming from what Dimitri said is, given causal closure, how do you fit these two things together, agent causation and the other? And that's really Paraboom's worry. Okay, so we'll see you after lunch.